The ocean has been my passion since I was young. I used to dream of being Jacques Cousteau, exploring the seven seas with my team. But in just a few generations, the underwater world has changed dramatically all over the planet. So many places are now void of life. Our destruction of the natural world isn't just happening underwater. What can take millennia to create can be destroyed in hours. The consequences for us are dire, far-reaching, and often unexpected. I've spent my entire life studying natural ecosystems in places both pristine and degraded, and have worked for 30 years to help save what's left.
We have doubled the total area protected in the ocean.
Our life support system depends on all other species and intact natural spaces. Without them, everything falls out of balance. But nature is a sustainable, resilient, and regenerative engine. It's time we get out of the way and let it work for us. Today, the world is at a crossroad. But if we understand the nature of nature, if we change our current trajectory, there is hope.
Hello, I'm Jean Case, Chairman of the National Geographic Society and National Geographic Partners, our innovative joint venture with the Walt Disney Company. And on behalf of everyone here at National Geographic, it's my joy to warmly welcome you and to say thanks for joining us for what we hope will be an exciting event as we come together to celebrate a new groundbreaking book by our very own Dr. Enric Sala, The Nature of Nature: Why We Need the Wild. As Explorer in Residence here at National Geographic, Enric carries forward our rich 132-year history of investing in science, exploration, education, and storytelling to illuminate and protect the wonder of our world. You know, Enric truly embodies a new generation of National Geographic explorers who come from around the world and who beautifully reflect the rich diversity of our world. They come from all walks and backgrounds, working around the globe to open our eyes to new discoveries and innovations, and to help solve some of the world's most pressing challenges. And the work of our Pristine Seas initiative that Enric will talk about today is a terrific example of this. It was 12 years ago, while serving as a professor and working on a scientific paper on the threats to marine life, that Enric had an epiphany. He realized he was writing the obituary of the ocean. So with a burning passion and urgency to address these challenges, he brought an audacious idea to National Geographic. What if we could protect and help save the last wild places in the ocean before it's too late? And thus, Pristine Seas was born. The results to date have truly been dramatic, with more than 22 marine reserves covering more than 5.8 million square kilometers of our planet, twice the size of India. Today, Enric will update us on this work and share with us his vision for what's next, providing a little bit of a sneak peek into his book. I've had the true thrill of diving in waters around the globe with Enric and his team, and of watching him bring together and influence presidents, prime ministers, and policymakers, all in the interest of protecting our oceans. As he likes to say, first I help them fall in love with the ocean, and then I tell them what we need to do to protect the last wild places on our planet. When Enric gave me an early manuscript of his book, I couldn't put it down. It's compelling, engaging, and important, and it spotlights Enric's unique ability to use storytelling to weave scientific fact, policy, and economic data to help change hearts and minds. And the fact that on its first day of publication, it zoomed to #1 in more than one category on Amazon, it speaks to Enric's skill as a scientist and gifted storyteller. Here at National Geographic, we could not be more proud of Enric Sala and the extraordinary impact of his work. And now I invite you to sit back and enjoy this talk as moderator Juliet Eilperin leads a conversation with Enric. Juliet is a senior national affairs correspondent for the Washington Post, focusing on federal environmental policy. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner and author of 2 books, Demon Fish, Travels Through the Hidden World of Sharks, and Fight Club Politics, How Partisanship is Poisoning the House of Representatives. Juliet, we are grateful to have you here leading this conversation, and it's now my delight to turn it over to you.
Hey, Enric, excellent to see you virtually. I want to start by, I always say that while there are many scientists who are great to spend time with, marine biologists are among my favorite scientists to be out in the field with, because they're smart enough that, of course, you always learn something when you're out with them, but they have a sense of adventure, which often comes out when you're diving. And throughout your book, you really talk about what it's been like to go diving from when you were a small child in the Mediterranean to, modern day. And could you just talk a little about how diving has shaped your view of the ocean, as well as just how the environment works?
Well, wonderful to be on this event with you, Juliet. I wish we were somewhere in person. Yeah, diving, there is no way of learning without being there. When I was a little boy watching the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau every Sunday evening, that's what I wanted to do with my life. I was dreaming, I was dying about being a diver and being underwater. And actually, when I started diving, I realized that I learned so much just being underwater and watching, observing. There were so many things that were not in textbooks, right, that then I had to figure out. So to me, diving was the conduit to my dream, to be able to achieve that dream that I had to be a diver in Jacques Cousteau's boat, which I was born too late for, but fortunately, I was able to do it afterwards.
Got it. And, one thing you also talked about is that when you were in academia, there was a point where you realized, and I'll quote you, you said, "One day I realized that all I was doing was just writing the obituary of ocean life." And I was wondering, can you just elaborate about that? What is it that you found that you were doing in your research, and how did it prompt you to change directions in your career?
Yeah, I was studying the impacts of humans in the ocean, the impacts of fishing and global warming, and it was all bad news. It was doom and gloom. And one day I realized that that's what we were doing. We were rewriting the obituary of ocean life with more and more data and more precision, and publishing more papers that just confirmed what we already knew. So I felt like the doctor who's telling the patient how she's going to die with excruciating detail, but not offering a cure. So I decided to quit academia and work on the cure, because otherwise it was frustrating. It's already depressing enough to work on conservation, right? So when you are just describing the problem, if you are a pathologist, that's not why I became a diver and I spent all these years studying. I love to see a healthy ocean. So I wanted to work on trying to help bring it back.
And so then when you embarked on this, one of the things that I also think is interesting is that obviously you and a number of other scientists have been making the case for why it matters to have diversity in the ocean, why it matters to have diversity in the planet. But there was also a particularly talented journalist, Natasha Loder from The Economist, who challenged you on essentially making the case in concrete terms rather than just aspirational terms. And I was just wondering, if you could just explain that. How do you think that at this point you can make the argument that actually there is a concrete benefit for having biodiversity.
That's one of the problems of speaking inside the ivory tower to the converted versus the rest of the world who don't have even the basic information about what you're talking about. So for biologists, for naturalists, it is evident that the more biodiversity, the more species, the more complexity you have in an ecosystem, the more mature the ecosystem is, the more things it does, the more things it provides, right? And if you compare a golf course with a forest, it's clear that the forest provides many more benefits, except for a small number of people who believe that a forest is a hindrance. So but the rest of the world were telling us, yeah, all these species, but why do we need all these species, right? One thing is that the intrinsic right of these species to exist that many religious people believe in, or scientists, because we love what we study. But for most people, we had to demonstrate the utility of nature. Why do we need 9 million species of plants and animals? And we say, well, the oxygen we breathe is produced mostly by bacteria and microscopic algae in the ocean, together with the forests and the plants of the land. The food we eat is food, except some of that processed stuff that you can find in the supermarket. And the clean water we drink, hopefully, is being filtered by a forest. So what else do you need? So, well, but do we need all those species out there? Of these 9 million species, do we really need all of them, or we could do with less? Of course, we don't have the answer for every one of those species. But what we have learned is that we better don't tamper with it, because there are species that might have a role that is key in our world that we don't know. And I mentioned bacteria in the ocean that produces most of the oxygen that we breathe. The species of bacterium, of microbe, that produces most of the oxygen wasn't discovered until 30 years ago, right? So this is our life support system. And we do know that the more biodiversity, the more species, the more complex and healthy ecosystems are, the forests, wetlands, grasslands, coral reefs, the more benefits it provide for us. So to those people who want utility, well, we don't have the answer for every one of the 9 million species of plants and animals, but we have compelling, overwhelming evidence that shows that the more biodiversity there is, the better, the more good things the natural world provides that we can enjoy.
Great. And now we're going to hear from some leading environmental experts about what they think of your work.
In the midst of this global crisis, we have been forced to reimagine our relationship with the natural world. The book, Nature of Nature, Why We Need the Wild, tells the story that as the environment recovers, we inevitably also need to do the same. We need the wild because it is a wide field of opportunities. Thank you.
Why do we need the wild? Because we got wild genes. We come from nature, not that long ago. A few thousand years ago, we were just one more mammal in the planet, and all of a sudden, in a matter of a couple of thousand years, we have become this urban animal, which has created such a global mess. And in terms of fixing up what human has done with the life supporting system of the planet, we need to understand that besides being a moral imperative to protect nature and all kind of life forms, the way to address the big global challenges is using nature in our favor. Nature-based solution is one of the most effective, cost-effective actions that we should be using, particularly to mitigate and adapt to climate change in the context of a new paradigm of consumption and production. So we need wild because we come from the wilderness. We are a urban mammal that needs nature to thrive. Thank you so much.
I'm John Podesta, founder of the Center for American Progress. Wilderness is critical to our health, our well-being, our prosperity, and our sense of hope, and wilderness is in jeopardy. The wild provides the essential elements we need to survive, the clean water we drink and air we breathe, the web of life that supports us. Yet in the last 20 years, the United States lost a football field of nature to development every 30 seconds. 1 million plant and animal species are at risk of extinction in the coming decades because of climate change and loss of nature. As Enric has pointed out, without them, there is no us. He's right, and that's why The Nature of Nature is such an important and timely book. We have to act now to protect at a minimum 30% of our lands and waters by 2030, to keep our planet wild and to keep our hope alive.
Why we need the wild? Because as humans, we came from the wild and we forgot. They say that life starts at the end of your comfort zone. When we move into the wild, we learn that we are not foreigners, but that we are part of them and they must be part of us. I've been very lucky to call Enric Sala friend for many years, and even luckier to scuba dive with him in faraway places, with sharks or with whales. And I've seen Enric Sala whispering to the things and animals surrounding him that empower him and allow him to write The Nature of Nature, a book that will influence and change the minds of generations to come for years and years.
Now, we've heard of folks talking about, the different impacts of it. And I also, there are plenty of well-known people today who there are plenty of well-known people today who have talked about what we need to do about the environment. But also one of the most interesting figures you write about is unknown 23-year-old Soviet biologist who really illuminated what happens in the natural world. Can you just tell us briefly about his research and how it informs what you think we need to keep in mind today?
Yeah, Grigory Gauss, in the late 20s, early 30s in the Soviet Union, he applied for a Fulbright grant scholarship to come to the United States, but he didn't get it. So he had to stay in Moscow to do his studies. And there were some mathematicians that theorized, they came up with these models predicting what would happen when you put two species together, when you put a predator and a prey, right? And they predicted that there would be an oscillation. When the prey increases, like let's say rabbits increase, then the foxes increase. But as the foxes increase, they deplete the rabbit population. And as the rabbits become less abundant, then the foxes become less abundant. With the release of the predation from the foxes, the rabbits recover again, and so on and so forth, right? But nobody had shown that. So he got bacteria, paramecium, yeast, several species of microorganisms, and cultured them in test tubes. And he looked at what happens when you have one species living alone in one test tube with food. What happens when you add species that compete for the same food? And what happens when you add a predator? And his first experiments show that when you add a predator, invariably, the predator eats all the prey and both die. The only way he was able to demonstrate experimentally what the theoreticians have shown or indicated that oscillation between the predator and the prey, he had to introduce a refuge, a shelter for the prey, so some of them could survive. This is a really good analogy of what's happening now with humans and the world, because we are driving species extinct. And the only way that the species can survive is if we give them some space. Right now, we have national parks, we have reserves, but only 15% of the land is protected, and only 7% of the ocean is protected. And it's not enough, because species continue going extinct. Will we reach to a point where we're going to eat everything else and everybody will die? I don't think so. I don't hope so, because humans are, in the end, are going to show its intelligence. But that shows, from the test tube to the globe, the importance of having refuges, of having safe spaces for all these species to survive.
Let's talk about rewilding for a minute. I mean, in an era when we have monoculture, where we have places where we have simplified the environment, how possible is rewilding?
rewilding is one of the most exciting things in the world, because we have seen that when we introduce a large species like a bison or a wolf in an ecosystem that this is still in relatively good shape, the ecosystem recovers faster. So we know that when we protect places, life comes back spectacularly, both on land and in the ocean. But when we reintroduce species that were there, performing a key role in the ecosystem, like the herbivores that graze in different ways, like the deer grazes in a different way as the wild horse, as the bison, right? And the wolf controls that prevents the deer from destroying all the young forests. So rewilding makes recovery of nature much faster. And we cannot rewild a place with wolves if we don't have all the prey that the wolf needs to survive, right? We cannot start building a house from the roof. We need a certain amount of prey to support the population of the predators. But it's showing great promise, and not only in the United States, but also in Europe. Now, the European bison, which we see in the cave paintings from thousands of years ago, it used to be all around Europe. Now they are being reintroduced. There are bison already in the United Kingdom, in Kent. It's extraordinary. So people are bringing back those species, and the ecosystem is coming with them. They are bringing the ecosystems together.
And at the end of your book, you end up touching on the coronavirus, and you, in fact, you use a phrase which actually the Kentucky governor has been using every night when he gives his briefing, which is, "We're all in this together." Can you just explain that?
Yeah, before there were so many people who thought, well, these crises don't affect me. Climate change is something that is going to affect somebody in the future. Loss of nature, biodiversity, somebody in the Amazon, not me, right? Health crisis, Ebola. Well, this is something that's happening in Cameroon or Congo. It's not affecting me in the middle of the US, right? But this COVID pandemic has shown that we are all connected. It took only one person to get a virus from a wild animal to create an outbreak, which, thanks to our globalized lifestyle, spread like wildfire around the world. So today, the health of the richest person in the world is dependent on the health of even the poorest person in the poorest country. And this interdependence is not just among humans. We are dependent on all other creatures of the planet. And the more we disrespect nature, the more we trade wildlife around the world like commodities, the more we encroach upon intact habitats like forests, the higher the chance that these viruses bringing infectious diseases are going to come on our doorstep.
And now we're going to have a couple of questions from some scientists who I think are going to prompt you to think deeply about some of these questions.
Enric, if you had the opportunity to ask all of the people in the world to do one thing to ensure the survival of this amazing planet, all of its creatures, including ourselves, what would that one thing be? I look forward to your response, and many thanks for all the great things you've done to help preserve life in this sea, and I loved your book.
Bob Ballard, my friend, my mentor, and what a fantastic role model. Okay, so what can everybody do? If I were the king of the world and I had that magic wand, there is one thing I would ask people to consider, which is eat more plants and less animals. If we did that, that would help our health and the planet, because plants provide the proteins and the nutrients that we need. We don't need to eat meat in order to acquire all these proteins. Bulls, very strong, they eat grass, but also production of meat requires so much land and so much fresh water. So if we reduce animal consumption to produce the plants that we need to eat, would require much less land. So part of that land that is released could be given back to nature, which would produce many, many more benefits. But also, livestock is one of the largest producers of methane, which is one of the strongest, most powerful greenhouse gases. So that would also reduce the impacts of climate change. So that's it, a plant-based diet. That would be my instructions for every single person on the planet.
Hey Enric, Kiorana from the Cook Islands. I'm extremely excited for your new book and I can't wait to get my copy. But I have a question for you first. We all know that COVID-19 is devastating economies, especially those in the developing world and those heavily reliant on tourism. So as these governments are scrambling to try to diversify their economies, how do we convince them that protection is just as important?
Jess Cramp, the most formidable shark biologist from the Cook Islands. Yeah, it's tough when you ask or you suggest to governments that they should invest in nature. Of course, right now, the priority is to take care of the people in need, people who are sick, people who have lost loved ones, people who are in economic distress. But also, this is a time to build back better, not to prop up the industries of the past, but actually make sure that we will have a more resilient future. We've been growing for unfettered growth. We've been worshiping the golden idol of GDP growth, but that's clearly not sustainable. The pandemic has shown that that construct has very shaky foundations. And we do know that if we protect at least a third of the planet by 2030, not only we will help to prevent part of the massive extinction of species that is coming and the collapse of our life support system, but also we would help nature help us fight climate change through more carbon sequestration, absorbing much of our carbon pollution. But also economically, it makes so much sense because the global economic output would be much greater with a third of the planet protected than with the business as usual. And finally, the benefits of investing in nature would outweigh the costs. For every dollar that we invest in national parks, for example, in protected areas, nature gives us $5 in return at least. And if I can show one more statistic, the cost, even if we just look at the cost, forget about the benefits for 1 second. The cost of managing a system of protected areas that covers a third of the planet is less than what the world spends today on video games. Thank you for the question, Jess.
Well, Enric, thank you for talking about all this with me. I'd like to point out that you can purchase The Nature of Nature at your favorite independent bookstore or online. It's available now. So go out and read it. It's worth your time. Thank you,
Thank you so
Enric.
much, Juliet.
Bye.